Welcome to the Sheth Leadership Academy Lecture Series, a series of lectures delivered by Professor Jagdish Sheth, author of numerous classic business books such as The Rule of Three and Chindia Rising. This lecture is on global expansion strategies of multinationals from emerging markets. I hope you enjoy Professor Sheth's informal, conversational style, corroborated by real-world examples.
The rise of multinationals from emerging economies or emerging markets. Today they become pretty dominant competitors worldwide. And what are their global expansion strategies? Is there one single strategy? Is there only one specific country that dominates in terms of generating more global multinationals from that country? That's the whole area I would like to focus on. We will definitely conclude that there is no one single strategy, that there are multiple strategies for global expansion and therefore global competition from multinationals from emerging markets. So here are some what I would call surprise announcements. In 2002, South African brewing company acquires the second largest beer company in America called Miller Brewing Company, has officially a merger, and the new company is called SAB Miller, and for a while became number one company. Fast forward 2008, a Brazilian company, InBev, merges with a Belgian beer company, Interbrew, creates a company Belgium-based, and then makes the play to buy out the largest American beer company, Anheuser-Busch, with brand names like Budweiser and other brands. This was an absolute surprise because the world expected the reverse, where the Anheuser-Busch in its globalization would probably buy out Kirin beer in Japan, for example, may buy out Tiger beer in, let's say, Singapore or wherever they are, may buy out Kingfisher beer, and may buy out Heineken, etc. This was just the reverse. Second data point. Out of nowhere, Indian IT services, the outsourcing of IT services, started with very humble beginnings, which was to do the coding for Y2K. Remember, all of the computers were set in 2 digits and the 2 digits were 000. The new millennium was coming and we had given up that competency. Nobody knew the old languages like a COBOL language or Fortran language, etc. They were all programmed in those languages and comparable machine language. From those humble beginnings today, Indian IT services industry is $150 billion, mostly export oriented, and you have companies like TCS, Tata Consultancy Services, crossing more than $10 billion, Wipro Technologies, Infosys, almost knocking the doors of $10 billion companies each, and the top 5-6 companies are all crossing $10 billion as a marker. Nobody thought about that one. They would compete equally well against the IBM of the world, the Accenture of the world, Capgemini of the world, and in the process, a EDS of the world has basically collapsed. Third data point. Tata Motors in 2008 makes the acquisition of what is the British icon brand name, which is Jaguar. As you know, Jaguar and Land Rover were really owned by Ford Motor Company, which had a strategy of having multiple luxury brands like Volvo, etc. They were struggling very hard in 2008 with the economic downturn, world economy. Of course, US automobile industry was decimated. There was no money to buy, etc. And they were forced to sell their luxury brands and concentrate only on one brand name. So they put up Volvo for sale, Jaguar for sale. The surprising was that it was bought out by an Indian automobile company called Tata Motors. Think about here. What was an official car in the British Empire? Diplomat's car. If you were a British diplomat anywhere in the world, Jaguar was the car. As for the US, it would be Cadillac, for example. And all of a sudden, it is bought out by a company from an ex-colony. Can't even imagine this 15 years ago. So while we have all these very exciting new news about the Silicon Valley companies, such as the rise of Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, WhatsApp, all of them are less than 10 years old, all the new millennium babies. And they're pretty big babies. But we also have these very traditional industries like the beer industry, the steel industry, the automobile industry, where the emerging market multinationals are coming in a very big way, either through acquisition or greenfield expansions. The really leader of all this one, which came as much as a surprise in maybe early 90s, after the collapse of communism, many of the Eastern European countries who are independent nations now had lots of stranded assets, all government-owned enterprises, especially steel mills. So Poland wants to divest their steel mills. They have no money to invest anymore. Hungary wants to divest its steel mills. So will be Czech and Slovakia. So will be whatever they are. And there was one aggregator, Mittal was his name, based in London for tax purposes, for access to capital purposes. But a gentleman of Indian origin begins to now make a global play through acquisitions and buys out steel mills after steel mills and becomes number one steel company in the world. Then they merged with Arcelor, basically a company based in one of those Luxembourg kinds of marketplaces, and begins to become the dominant, the number one ArcelorMittal as a steel company. These are the new realities. So this lecture talks about us understanding global expansion of multinationals from emerging markets, what are their aspirations, and how are they likely to expand, and how are they likely to compete with us. So let's go through that journey. Again, here are some key observations. Global competition from emerging market multinationals is real across industries, ranging from agricultural seeds, and by the way, two largest seed companies are now one out of Mexico and one out of India, to industrial raw materials, such as, for example, fiber for making garments, or petrochemical products for that matter, or any industrial raw materials like like iron ore, coal. India is one of the largest exporters of coal, as is in fact China. So these are very interesting new phenomenon too, of course, not only just industrial raw materials, agricultural commodities, but also in fact they are into branded products and services. So let me just show all that around. Second one is competition from emerging market multinationals is not limited to China. In my introductory comments, I deliberately did not mention any Chinese companies because that's very obvious. And we'll talk about them as we go along. The surprise all of us had when, for example, Huawei Technologies became the largest one in telephone infrastructure manufacturing, surpassing Lucent, which had to merge with Alcatel. Even the combination was less, or Ericsson, or Siemens. Unthinkable. And we'll talk about other Chinese corporations. But the competition is not limited from China. It is equally there from Mexico, from India, South Africa, Russia, Brazil, Central America, and several African countries, which is fascinating. Again, most of them would be labeled as emerging market multinationals. While China competes across virtually all sectors of industries, if there's one global dominant player competing against America or Japan or Germany or France, probably China is becoming the number one across industries, from steel mills to the banking sector, to pharmaceutical even, to of course telephone infrastructure, to cell phone makers, to services, no matter how you look at it. But competition from other countries is much more focused and selective. It is more industry by industry, and therefore we need to understand in which industries, which multinational from which country will be competing against us. That's the main proposition that I want to make. So what are their global expansion strategies through which they will bump into us? The first one I find most fascinating is what I call reverse brand life cycle. This is very, very dangerous, disruptive strategy. Unlike companies that grew through the Industrial Revolution in Germany, France, England, America, where you begin with an invention, have a proprietary technology of some sort, patent-based. Pharmaceutical drug industry would be obvious example, but it's true of machineries, it's true of anything. And you offer that primarily as a high margin, low volume product because you make those products. You need to invest in the capital dollars to build the factories, and therefore you start as a premium brand. And for the sake of growth, you begin to become more mainstream and become what is called value brand. And then ultimately you become a price brand, commoditize yourself. Margins begin to squeeze now more and more as the company or the industry matures. As we have seen with a lot of pharma companies right now, as we have seen in steel companies in America, as we have seen almost in the automobile companies even, and definitely consumer electronics. That's a typical cycle, right? That is very predictable. In fact, a brand name like Levi's has gone through that cycle. Very premium jeans. For the sake of growth, they go with the volume-driven retailers like JCPenney, Sears, Roebuck, etc., rather than remain specialty niche company. Once you are a volume-driven company, your growth is great, but your margins are collapsing. So you go on a cost-cutting and destroy the value of the brand. The brand is no longer unique. It is no longer exceptional. It is mainstream. Everybody has a Levi pants now. So you go on a cost-cutting, and the brand becomes primarily a price-sensitive brand rather than a premium brand. These emerging market multinationals have a reverse strategy, because in all of the premium and value-based segments, Americans dominate, Germans dominate in their markets, so do the French, so do the Japanese. So the way they come is where there is a small opening or a gap, which is a price segment. Low quality, low price. This is where the Chinese have come in a big way. So you start at a price competition level, then you move up your quality and become a value brand now. By the way, made in China products today are as good quality as any country. In fact, China is a producer of any quality you want, the cheapest or the most premium and the most luxury brand in chandeliers, in telephone gear, in steel, in pharmaceuticals, anything you think about, interestingly. So this is a reverse brand life cycle. You begin a price brand, then you become a value brand, and ultimately you become a premium brand. This cycle is nothing new. This is what Japan did as a emerging market competitor at that time. Started with the Datsun 210 car, totally boxy, no frills at all, not even air conditioning, sometimes not even a heating cooling inside the car, manual operations, but they made a beachhead in the US market. This is the Nissan Corporation as a parent company. Change the brand name, and then you become now Nissan sedan car, of course Infiniti, which is the luxury brand. So did Toyota. Toyota Corolla, Toyota Camry, which is a family sedan, which is the real competition, which is where the big market is, and then ultimately Lexus brand, for example, as a luxury brand. Korea has done the same thing. In the 80s, Korean corporations like Samsung, Hyundai automobiles began to the same journey. Now it is all other emerging markets, India, China, Brazil, etc., etc. So here are some key examples. There's a company called Mahindra and Mahindra, or just Mahindra, which is in automobiles and tractors, agricultural tractors, small tractors for American market, 55 horsepower or less, which is very cost efficient, fuel efficient, can be used for a home lawn. If you have a very large acreage in your home, for example, you can use that. It's a sit-down lawnmower, essentially. It has now entered the US market very successfully into that niche price market, primarily, affordability, and is giving enormous competition to John Deere successfully in the US market. Mark my words, once they succeed there, they will move up. As I mentioned, toward Indian IT services, from strictly coding work or augmented staffing, providing manpower, today they can do full-blown system integration, and they're now hoping even to get into the cloud computing services, mobile computing services. Of course, they dominate the ERP space, where they install the large platforms like Oracle or SAP, for example, or whatever they are. Haier, as a Chinese company in appliances, has done the same thing. Started with smaller appliances, wiped out the Italian manufacturers, took the market away, and today Haier, at least in China, has become a full-line appliance maker, competing and successfully against Electrolux or against Whirlpool in China or against General Electric in China. In fact, it is putting enough pressure worldwide to motivate General Electric to exit the appliance business altogether, pretty much. Interesting to watch. And now watch the Chinese cell phone makers. We thought Samsung dominated. Before that one, Nokia. But watch the Chinese guys. They have an enormous domestic size advantage. Xiaomi is a new brand, only offering through online, no retail distribution, taking a lot of cost out. They don't even make it themselves. They have a supply chain with Foxconn, as Apple has the same thing. So they're very cost efficient, and through the internet they're able to do direct selling in many ways. And Xiaomi has become very large cell phone manufacturer for Chinese market. They're now entering the Indian market, and they're going to come to US or advanced countries. It's a matter of time. So as you can see the graph diagram, you begin with the price segment, low left, move up to the value segment by improving your quality and the processes, but keep your prices competitive. and then ultimately aspire to offer a premium line of products or a premium branding depending upon whether you are a B2B company or whether you are a consumer company by and large. Second strategy, which again is very non-intuitive. Emerging market multinationals figured out that advanced countries will have tremendous entrenched competition, lot of political clout, lobby pressures are openly done, which means government will try to slow down either exporting the products despite free trade agreements, despite the WTO, World Trade Organization regime, all that stuff. There are ways to slow down. Everybody would like to protect their domestic suppliers, domestic makers, because jobs are at stake, whatever the reasons are. So they decided, this emerging market multinationals, to say, let's go to other emerging markets first, get even a bigger scale, bigger understanding how to do business globally, and then come to advanced markets. This strategy is very well practiced by the Chinese enterprises. And of course, best one is the company I mentioned earlier, Huawei Technologies. So they take the Chinese market, come out with a telephone infrastructure for wireless carriers such as China Mobile or whatever Chinese cell phone operators are. Then they go to Africa, provide the same to African carriers, hardwire the technology, get the core competency, absolutely brilliant engineering set of people, understand all the climatic zones and topologies, because cell phones have to operate in so many different climatic zones and topographies. And now they're absolutely seeking business from AT&T Wireless or Verizon, which is basically Vodafone now, knocking the doors of Orange or whatever the companies are in France, or T-Mobile or Sprint. These are large operators who are their customers. Also create regional brands, consumer brands, and therefore there's a pull branding power, just like what Samsung has done, just like what Apple has done. But this Huawei Technologies is coming in consumer products, but also they are primarily in the B2B telephone infrastructure. Lenovo, interesting, again Chinese company. IBM exits the PC business because low margin, as I mentioned. Very low margin business is commodity. The value add in PC making is only about 11% in the factory, and therefore they exited ThinkPad. Remember that name? Lenovo buys them, but Lenovo now goes from Chinese market to India. It is number one in India, not Dell computers, not HP, for example, or any of the traditional PC makers out of America. Godrej, which is an Indian multinational. We all know about Tatas and we know about Birlas, but Godrej is a very interesting company. They are both the consumer and the industrial. In industrial markets, they dominate the Indian market in having steel made, or a metal made, what we call the cabinets for home markets. What's the competency? Not just the design of the cabinet, but also the lock system. They are very good locksmiths. So you want to protect your jewelry, you want to put your cash inside, and these are shelves that they offer, the cabinets they offer, which are steel made, because India is a tropical country, wood will have rotting mechanism, etc. So this is very popular. But they are also on the consumer side in insects, for example, mosquito repellents. What they've done is to go from India to Africa first, same climatic zones. So the species may be the same, and then eventually they will come and compete with companies like SC Johnson around here, for example. What is a common denomination between these two strategies is what Sam Walton talked about when he made Walmart become very big by saying, hit them where they ain't. Go into small towns where big retailers like Sears or Kmart will never think about going, or they don't have the economics of doing business there. And as you know, the rest is history. Walmart became the largest retailer in the process, of course, starting with small rural America and then going into the metro area. It's a very similar strategy that I see. Third, many of these multinationals from emerging markets have significant diaspora. Of course, with China and India, it is the largest numbers in diaspora. But Brazil has lots of Brazilians living abroad. Lots of Nigerians live abroad out of Africa. What you do is to ride your diaspora market wherever they are as your global expansion, because the brands were having a strong home brand equity. When these people were growing up, their parents, their grandparents, when they visited them, knew about that local brand. It'll be like Inca Cola out of Peru. Everybody in Peru will know the brand. It'll be like, in fact, Thumbs Up in the, I guess, soft drinks business in India. It just goes on and on. I can give you hundreds of examples from different places. So they say, oh, look, the brand has a local equity and our country of origin people are living abroad all over. Can we ride into the diaspora market? It's a very large thing. So Mexico has done a wonderful job of bringing Mexican foods, whether those are tortillas or whatever they make, bringing into America. So there's enough Mexican population and they can bring it wherever they go, right? Italians did with pizza, for example. Greeks have done with Greek food. It's very common. Size will matter. So here are some examples. There's a restaurant called Udupi, which is meant for vegetarians, mostly rice-based, because South India is rice-consuming country. North India is a wheat-consuming company. It'll be more like Southeast Asia, more like Vietnam, more like Thailand, more like Burma or Myanmar, more like Japan, more like China. They have Indian diaspora all over the world, but especially in Gulf countries, where Indians from India go to work there as guest workers, make lots of money and then come back to India. More recently, IT services professionals all over the world, they go to do work at the outsourced place, a company that is outsourced in their facilities. And they, of course, like their own food, like all of us do. I mean, we love our hamburgers, we love our, soft drinks the same way. And these markets are large enough to allow that. Alibaba, which is an e-commerce platform like Amazon and probably more strategic and dominant in the world in the future globalization of e-commerce companies. Ethnic Chinese merchants that are all over the world, as you know. Chinese diaspora is mind-boggling in Southeast Asia. They are very large in San Francisco, New York, around here. They're large in Europe. They're large in Latin America. They're everywhere, just like Indian diaspora. And Alibaba now offers their platform for Chinese merchants to sell their products anywhere in the world. It's like eBay off, the Chinese diaspora. Fourth strategy, which is an extension of the third, that says that once you have a diaspora market, which is usually specialty retailers who cater to the diaspora, restaurants will be one of them, grocery stores will be another one, etc. Now you take your brand, which becomes popular in that country, and you take that brand from a diaspora brand sold only those through specialty retailers into mainstream distribution. So in grocery products, from specialty grocery stores by each ethnic group, let's say if you go to Los Angeles, there are 70 communities from the world where people speak their native language, buy their native products, including fresh produce, fruits, etc., besides, of course, canned products, whatever they do, frozen foods, etc., which is very fascinating. 70 in one city. If you go to little Saigon, you feel like you are in Vietnam. If you go to the Pioneer Boulevard, you feel like in Cerritos in Southern California, like you are in little India town. It's very fascinating. And these are half a mile long strip places where you have nothing but shops after shops. They speak in the native languages, whatever they are. And so that one, now you take that brand, which has got a local footing, and make it into a typical supermarket brand. So Patak Pickles, which is an Indian pickle, spicy, hot, out of UK-based company, but of Indian origin, now offers that as a mainstream product in a typical supermarkets like the Sainsbury, for example, or whatever the mainstream supermarkets in United Kingdom are, right? Tesco, etc., etc., which is very fascinating. And of course, that's because most of the UK people, the British, convenient food is no longer fish and chips as it used to be, but it is Indian curry. So this pickle goes very well with Indian curries essentially, which is interesting. And of course, Mexican foods are in every aisle in America. Tortillas to salsas, etc. They may be made locally, but they are of Mexican origin. Inca Cola that I mentioned earlier, a Peru drink, has become pretty much a Latin culture, Latin lifestyle. It rides above Peru to all of the Latin America. And the brand is bought out by Coca-Cola because it was so successful in Peru. Coca-Cola could not even have a good market share there. They said, let's buy the company and make it into a diaspora brand. In this case, it would be a Latin American culture brand. It's similar to the product they have about the orange flavored product out of Italy, right? And they made it into a Mediterranean climate brand, non-cola, and obviously no caffeine inside, pretty much. As in fact they have done with Thumbs Up brand out of India into sort of a diaspora brand, right? Kingfisher beer, very interesting story. It is the Indian brand bought out by Heineken. Heineken has a controlling interest. And Heineken would make Kingfisher probably number 2 brand in the world, mark my words. So you have Heineken brand and Kingfisher. As they also own Tiger brand, these 3 will become world brands with the support from Heineken. Strategy number 5. You go global by simply riding the coattails of your key accounts. As your key accounts are going global, they want you to tag along as their supplier because they like what you do, you are creating good value for them, and hence you ride along wherever your key customers are going. One example that I found out of India was Sona Group. This was a great gentleman who had a PhD in mechanical engineering from Michigan State University, went back to India, became an entrepreneur, and started making steering wheels for all automobile makers. But Toyota also bought their steering wheel for the Indian market. But they found these are a great company, good quality assurance, believes in more modern approach to doing things, and has taken Sona Group all over the world wherever Toyota assembles their product. Aerospace industry, this is very common. And again, aerospace parts will be made more and more from India because aerospace is both military and commercial. So companies like Airbus or Boeing or Lockheed probably will not buy from Chinese manufacturers because of all the security issues, or from Russia. So India is gaining a huge advantage through geopolitical process, would be another one. And of course, Foxconn is going global from China to, in fact, other parts of the world as a manufacturer for companies like Apple, PC makers, etc., etc. Basically, all consumer economy products and services. Next one, which is a follow-on to the previous strategy, is OEM to branded products and services. You are making products in a private label. You are primarily a manufacturer behind the scenes like Foxconn. It is not mentioned on the product that people consume, but after getting your OEM market in place, getting economies of scale, getting professional human talent, manufacturing excellence, etc., you go global with your own brand. And that's happening, as I mentioned, in automotive components big time, from turn signals to ignition controls to steering wheels out of India and to some extent out of China. Garment manufacturers, this is becoming very common strategy. You primarily make garments for well-known brands like the, let's say, Manhattan, or the brands like Van Heusen for men's shirts, or Arrow shirts, or any one of the private store brands, essentially by and large, which means a brand patronized in a given store, some fashion designers brands. You make it all them either in China or in Bangladesh or in Caribbean islands. But then now as a OEM manufacturer, we say I have the capability, I make a world-class brand now, I offer my own brand and go direct to the consumer with that brand through the channels of distributions. Engineering and professional services, very common. Wipro is one of the largest professional services, similar to SAIC, for example, which began in the aerospace military area. And they are very good professional services. Under Wipro brand, they will offer engineering services as outsourcing services to companies who are more in R&D, manufacturing, design, that area. And I found fascinating Global Green as a company. You know, the dill pickles that we buy are shifting to making from India with an Indian agricultural product called Gaur, G-A-U-R, that looks like a dill pickle. So this company makes it for the largest pickle makers in America. It's not grown in California anymore, but it is grown over there. Just like in the wine business, wineries can be anywhere, and you make the wine and then they blend it, right? Now the winemaker says originally, rather than blend it for someone else, let me make my own brand, make my own bottle, etc. Same thing. So we expect Global Green to offer their own brands longer term. Number 7, leverage skill advantage. You have some skill that is your differential advantage, your what is called a resource advantage. Nobody can duplicate that. And you use that. So Philippines is becoming a dominant country by specializing in the BPO business and competing very successfully against India, against other emerging markets, and of course advanced countries. Indian IT services that I mentioned earlier is the same situation. There is a very large pool of skilled, talented workers who knows how to do software software programming, who knows how to do BPO businesses, etc. And of course, India today is the largest diamond cutter in the world. They know how to cut diamonds, especially volume-driven, smaller and smaller size diamonds. So the diamond cutters that used to be in Antwerp or New York are primarily focusing as niche players, big diamonds. A rough diamond which will ultimately generate 1 carat or more diamonds, because they cannot compete. The talent is very much localized in India. As for example, carpets were localized in Middle Eastern countries, for example, like Iran at one time, Persian rugs as we used to call them, the same idea here. Next, leverage country of origin reputation. Over generations, country has acquired a reputation for something that they are unique. Caribbean rum. In rum, you think of Caribbean countries. Vodka, you think of Russia. Beer, surprisingly, you think of Mexico, which is very interesting. Beer is much more wider, but Mexico has a good image about making great beer for whatever reason, so they can use the country of origin reputation. Number 9, leverage domestic scale advantage. In other words, you may have a large domestic market, and the scale advantage you get as you modernize a dominant domestic player, now you go international. So China Mobile is the largest cellular network operator, bigger than Vodafone or Airtel, which is an Indian company going global. China Mobile now is expanding outside of China in the Southeast region. So countries like, let's say, Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Indonesia, etc. Grupo Bimbo is a great success story from Mexico in the flour business. In fact, they are so large because Mexicans have tortillas. They make lots of things from corn flour or a wheat flour, etc. They began to then make acquisitions in the US, and they are the largest actually flour mill company in America now. Marble and granite I studied, I found very fascinating. 5-6 countries dominate: Brazil, Turkey, China, India, etc. But China and India are very large. Both consume lots of marble and granite domestically. They've learned how to make finished products out of it. China probably a little ahead of India. They have the quarries where they can, cut the quarry to make these stones essentially. Lots of these stones go into home market. They go into hospitality industry, hotel, motel, etc. And therefore, like the counter, vanity counters in every room, the main lobby, etc. Marble, granite is a mixture, and now they're coming here. Number 10 is called reverse innovation. Most of the emerging countries have 2 key issues about products: affordability and accessibility. The demand is there, the need is there, want is there, but they can't afford it. Or the distribution system is not there how to reach there. And therefore, you learn quite a lot in the domestic market. Invent something appropriate for the domestic market, which would be a good quality, not exceptional quality product, acceptable quality product, but at very low prices. Or in countries like India and maybe China, electricity is not there everywhere. So you come out with products which will be battery operated, portable. And this has been a major change in medical instruments. So companies like General Electric or Siemens or Philips are all going to India, learning how to cater to Indian markets, which may be about 10 times cheaper than the American market, make the business profitable, and then bring the product over here, that line of business within the product line, and offer to smaller town like rural hospitals in America or disadvantaged consumer markets, which they cannot afford very expensive products. Generic drugs from India is absolutely excellent strategy. They are the dominant player today. And America will not buy generic drugs from China because of the mistrust and the geopolitical conflict between the 2 nations. So India is gaining tremendous foothold around here. So is an Israeli company called Teva. They're all generic drug makers, and today more and more with affordability issue in this country, government through Medicare, Medicaid, insurance companies basically are telling to only prescribe generic products. They would not allow you to buy proprietary products anyhow. Chinese are doing the same in steel, aluminum, any industrial raw material. And of course, one of the great success stories at one time used to be Cemex as a company out of Mexico having a global expansion through acquisitions. So reverse innovation. Number 11 is focus regionally. In other words, you expand not globally because you don't have the capital or a talent without acquisition. So if you want to go greenfield, then you expand regionally, as Turkey's companies have done to expand into the European Union because of the potential integration of Turkey with with European Union, like Greece has been already integrated, a part of the European Union expansion into the Mediterranean countries. And Greece is waiting in the wings whether they will be invited or not, etc. And also they are very, very good friends of Russia, and therefore a lot of Turkish brands, which are very good brands domestically, go into the Russian market. South Africa has done the same thing to expand into all of Africa. In fact, the biggest footprint in Africa may be South African companies and South African leaders, sort of, conflict resolutions, political upheaval, they get involved. Brazil is doing the same thing in Latin America. 12th strategy, and the last one, but very powerful, is emerging market multinational acquiring large companies with great brands as assets, people assets, technology assets in advanced markets, especially among those industries that have become mature, they don't have growth, and they're commoditized, where margins are also low. And therefore, many advanced countries would like to exit those industries anyhow. In other words, vacating market theory. So, for example, beer industry we talked about. We talked about SAB buying out Miller Beer, InBev buying out Anheuser-Busch, Grupo Bimbo buying out flour business by and large. Hindalco, an Indian company, bought out the largest sheet aluminum company called Novelis, which was really a breakup of the Canadian aluminum company called Alcan. It's like Alcoa for us. Government mandated a breakup of that company for antitrust reasons, and they formed a separate company called Novelis, and Novelis was bought out by Hindalco, I think around 2005 or somewhere around that time. Same company, Hindalco, is owned by a large business group called Aditya Birla Group, ABB, and that group actually bought out a carbon black company out of Atlanta called Columbia Chemicals, and it is the largest carbon black company in the world now, with the domestic market size in India, with largest producer in America, for example. And as you know, carbon black goes quite a lot into a bunch of industries as an industrial raw material. Wipro has not only a IT company, but they have a spin-off of their consumer companies, which is how they began making vegetable shortenings and then soaps and all that stuff. They have bought out companies out of Unza, out of Singapore, to enter into Southeast Asia market. They're into like 11 countries in Malaysia, Indonesia, Thailand, and also mainland China through acquisitions. So around here, the multinationals from emerging markets are more and more focusing on mature industries where the large companies in advanced markets are anxious to exit, like the steel mills, for example, as we talked about, maybe aluminum, etc. And that's where the biggest opportunity arises. So I try to identify what are the differential advantages out of these 12 strategies. And in the next chart, I have grouped them into 6. First one I call is a flanking advantage, which means you flank the competition around them, emerging market to emerging markets to advanced markets. Reverse brand life cycle, low price, value, premium. Second one is the diaspora advantage. Greater the diaspora in foreign countries, greater the advantage. So you go global by serving the diaspora market, but eventually you go from diaspora to mainstream markets, as it is happening in out of China and India. Third one is a customer advantage, where your real strategic advantage is your customer. Customer really would like to patronize you. It is like Whirlpool Corporation being patronized by Sears Roebuck, which is interesting. So you go global with key accounts, and of course from OEM, where you are a private label maker, you eventually know how to distribute it, how to market it. You go through branded products and services. Fourth one is what I call a cost advantage. You have the skills, which is very reasonably priced for the talent that you have, whether those are scientists or whether those are diamond cutters. And you have the scale of the nation quite often, or a scale of the domestic market. Next one is number 5, called home turf advantage, which we already reviewed. Reverse innovation is one of them, and country of origin reputation is another one. And the last differential advantage or competitive advantage these enterprises have is what I would call a geopolitical advantage. Very important to understand that the markets are shaped as much by the geopolitics and country relationships as they are by free markets. So countries like India are in favor with America right now, for example, and therefore India gets an advantage in terms of the American market entry. China probably would not have the same advantage. So in that case, wherever you have the geopolitical alignment taking place, you encourage your corporations to focus in those geographies because the political tailwinds are enabling you to put a beachhead pretty much. And of course, it is in those countries that you invest by buying out mature companies out of those industries, which is acquisitions in advanced markets. So let me summarize. What are the lessons we have learned from these global expansion strategies of multinationals from emerging markets? Two sustainable strategies which have worked again and again and again across industries is what we call reverse brand life cycle. Start competing on price first, then on value proposition, then on performance or a premium proposition. And the second one is major acquisitions, not small, big acquisitions in legacy industries which are almost on a sunset mindset where the American corporation, a German corporation, a Scandinavian corporation, a Japanese corporation would like to exit, and therefore you become the buyers of those companies. Successfully transitioning from an ethnocentric culture, which is great if you're a domestic company, to a transnational culture as you become global is very key to long-term success. And most of these emerging market corporations are still nowhere near that. They're very ethnocentric. Whether you are a Brazilian company, whether you are a Chinese company, whether you are an Indian company, makes no difference. And the three links which are very weak in transformation from an ethnocentric to a transnational culture is human resource policies, business processes, and finance. First two are easy to understand, but why finance? The reason for finance is that the CFOs of those organizations come from the traditional a CPA becoming a controller, then a treasurer and a CFO. But in the global market today, the role of a CFO is so strategic where they know how to do mergers, acquisitions. They know how to raise capital in more advanced country stock markets. It's a very different skill set altogether. There's a discontinuity of your competencies now becoming your liability. Your core competency becomes from an asset to a liability, and those are the three areas: your human resource processes, your business processes, and your finance. So let me conclude. Competition from emerging market multinationals is real and not limited from China. There is no one model of global expansion among these emerging market multinationals. They range from flanking to domestic scale to skill advantage to leveraging key customers and diaspora ecosystems. The two most sustainable strategies are acquisitions in mature markets, exited by advanced countries or wanting to exit by advanced countries, and reverse brand life cycle. I hope you have enjoyed this lecture. I found very fascinating learning all these things myself, teaching in the classrooms and to the executives, and I thought I would put a framework, a comprehensive approach to putting it all together.
Thanks for listening to this lecture on global expansion strategies of multinationals from emerging markets with Professor Jagdish Sheth. For more about Professor Sheth and the Sheth Leadership Academy, visit www.shethleadershipacademy.com.